Its heavy base descended on the back of the detective's head with stunning force. The next moment the battle was ended, and the doctor, panting with exhaustion, held the limp form of an unconscious man in his arms. He lowered the detective to the floor and straightened up again, listening tensely. So brief and intense had been the struggle that even now he could hardly believe in its reality. It seemed impossible, too, that the struggle had not been heard. Then he realized dully, as a louder roll of thunder smote on his ears, that the elements themselves had played into his hand. The storm, with its wind and fury, had returned just in time to save him and drown out all sounds of conflict from the rest of the house with its giant clamor. He bent swiftly over Anderson, listening to his heart. Good. The man still breathed. He had enough on his conscience without adding the murder of a detective to the black weight. Now he pocketed the revolver and the blueprint, gagged Anderson rapidly with a knotted handkerchief, and proceeded to wrap his own muffler around the detective's head as an additional silencer. Anderson gave a faint sigh. The doctor thought rapidly. Soon or late the detective would return to consciousness. With his hands free he could easily tear out the gag. He looked wildly about the room for a rope, a curtain. He had it. The detective's own handcuffs. He snapped the cuffs on Anderson's wrists, then realized that, in his hurry, he had bound the detective's hands in front of him instead of behind him. Well, it would do for the moment. He did not need much time to carry out his plans. He dragged the limp body, its head lolling, into the billiard room, where he deposited it on the floor in the corner farthest from the door. So far, so good. Now to lock the door of the billiard room. Fortunately, the key was there on the inside of the door. He quickly transferred it, locked the billiard room door from the outside, and pocketed the key. For a second he stood by the center table in the living room, recovering his breath and trying to straighten his rumpled clothing. Then he crossed cautiously into the alcove and started to pad up the alcove stairs, his face white and strained with excitement and hope. And it was then that there happened one of the most dramatic events of the night, one which was to remain for the next hour or so as bewildering as the murder, and which, had it come a few moments sooner or a few moments later, would have entirely changed the course of events. It was preceded by a desperate hammering on the door of the terrace. It halted the doctor on his way upstairs, drew Beresford on a run into the living room, and even reached the bedrooms of the women up above. "My God, what's that?" Beresford panted. The doctor indicated the door. It was too late now. Already he could hear Miss Cornelia's voice above. It was only a question of a short time until Anderson in the billiard room revived and would try to make his plight known. And in the brief moment of that resume of his position the knocking came again, but feebler, as though the suppliant outside had exhausted his strength. As Beresford drew his revolver and moved to the door, Miss Cornelia came in, followed by Lizzie. "It's the Bat!" Lizzie announced mournfully. "Goodbye, Miss Neily. Goodbye, everybody. I saw his hand all covered with blood. He's had a good night for sure." But they ignored her, and Beresford flung open the door. Just what they had expected, what figure of horror or fear they waited for, no one can say. But there was no horror and no fear. Only unutterable amazement as an unknown man, in torn and muddied garments, with a streak of dried blood seaming his forehead like a scar, fell through the open doorway into Beresford's arms. "Good God!" muttered Beresford, dropping his revolver to catch the strange burden. For a moment the unknown lay in his arms like a corpse. Then he straightened dizzily, staggered into the room, took a few steps toward the table, and fell prostrate upon his face, at the end of his strength. "Doctor!" gasped Miss Cornelia dazedly, and the doctor, whatever guilt lay on his conscience, responded at once to the call of his profession. He bent over the unknown man, the physician once more, and made a brief examination. "He's fainted," he said, rising. "Struck on the head, too." "But who is he?" faltered Miss Cornelia. "I never saw him before," said the doctor. It was obvious that he spoke the truth. "Does anyone recognize him?" all crowded about the unknown, trying to read the riddle of his identity. Miss Cornelia rapidly revised her first impressions of the stranger. When he had first fallen through the doorway into Beresford's arms, she had not known what to think. Now, in the brighter light of the living room, she saw that the still face, beneath its mask of dirt and dried blood, was strong and fairly youthful. If the man were a criminal, he belonged, like the bat, to the upper fringes of the world of crime. She noted mechanically that his hands and feet had been tied, ends of frayed rope still dangled from his wrists and ankles. And that terrible injury on his head! She shuddered and closed her eyes. "Does anyone recognize him?" repeated the Doctor, but one by one the others shook their head. Crook, casual tramp, or honest laborer unexpectedly caught in the sinister toils of the Cedar Crest affair, his identity seemed a mystery to one and all. "Is he badly hurt?" asked Miss Cornelia, shuddering again. "It's hard to say," answered the Doctor. "I think not." The unknown stirred feebly, made an effort to sit up. Beresford and the Doctor caught him under the arms and helped him to his feet. He stood there swaying, a blank expression on his face. "A chair," said the Doctor quickly. "Ah!" He helped the strange figure to sit down and bent over him again. "You're all right now, my friend," he said in his best tones of professional cheeriness. "Dizzy a bit, aren't you?" The unknown rubbed his wrists where his bonds had cut them. He made an effort to speak. "Water," he said in a low voice. The Doctor gestured to Billy. "Get some water, or whiskey, if there is any. That'd be better." "There's a flask of whiskey in my room, Billy," added Miss Cornelia helpfully. "Now, my man," continued the Doctor to the unknown, "you're in the hands of friends. Brace up and tell us what happened." Beresford had been looking about for the detective, puzzled not to find him, as usual, in charge of affairs. Now, "Where's Anderson? This is a police matter," he said, making a movement as if to go in search of him. The Doctor stopped him quickly. "He was here a minute ago. He'll be back presently," he said, praying to whatever gods he served that Anderson, bound and gagged in the billiard room, had not yet returned to consciousness. Unobserved by all except Miss Cornelia, the mention of the detective's names had caused a strange reaction in the unknown. His eyes had opened, he had started. The haze in his mind had seemed to clear away for a moment. Then, for some reason, his shoulders had slumped again, and the look of apathy came back to his face. But stunned or not, it now seemed possible that he was not quite as dazed as he appeared. The Doctor gave the slumped shoulders a little shake. "Rouse yourself, man," he said. "What has happened to you?" "I'm dazed," said the unknown thickly and slowly. "I can't remember." He passed a hand weakly over his forehead. "What a night!" sighed Miss Cornelia, sinking into a chair. "Richard Fleming murdered in this house, and now this?" The unknown shot her a stealthy glance from beneath lowered eyelids. But when she looked at him, his face was blank again. "Why doesn't someone ask his name?" queried Dale, and "Where the devil is that detective?" muttered Beresford, almost in the same instant. Neither question was answered, and Beresford, increasingly uneasy at the continued absence of Anderson, turned toward the hall. The Doctor took Dale's suggestion. "What's your name?" Silence from the unknown, and that blank stare of stupefaction. "Look at his papers." It was Miss Cornelia's voice. The Doctor and Bailey searched the torn trouser pockets, the pockets of the muddied shirt, while the unknown submitted passively, not seeming to care what happened to him. But search him as they would, it was in vain. "Not a paper on him," said Jack Bailey at last, straightening up. A crash of breaking glass from the head of the alcove stairs put a period to his sentence. All turned toward the stairs, or all except the unknown, who for a moment half rose in his chair, his eyes gleaming, his face alert, the mask of bewildered apathy gone from his face. As they watched, a rigid little figure of horror backed slowly down the alcove stairs and into the room. Billy, the Japanese. His oriental placidity disturbed at last, incomprehensible terror written in every line of his face. "Billy!"